So today's video is all about leather in fragrances, and it's no secret that I really enjoy leather in perfumes. But did you realise the importance of the fragrance of leather to modern perfumery? How actually leather is an integral part of how modern perfumery began? Well, if you didn't, I'm going to talk about it in this video, and I'm also going to talk about how the scent of leather, the leather accord, is made in perfumery. What are actually the raw ingredients of that? And I'm also going to talk about 10 different leather fragrances in this video. So if this kind of content interests you, then please do consider subscribing if you haven't done already. And also please like this video if you do end up liking this video. So I'm Claire Smith and I make videos all about perfume, perfume science, perfume history. And yeah, if that interests you, then please do consider subscribing. So let's start by talking about why leather is so integral to the beginnings of modern perfumery. So actually, the centre of leather making in France in the Middle Ages was Grasse in Provence, in the south of France. And today you may know Grasse more because of its fame for the making of perfumes. And actually perfumes really sprung out of a trend for perfumed leather gloves. So actually tanneries sprung up around the edges of Grasse, and tanneries were always positioned on the edges of towns because tanneries stank. Tanneries used horrible things such as human excrement and also human urine to tan their leathers. And this left a really horrible smell on the leather itself, which presented a problem. So if tanneries wanted to sell their leather goods to the aristocracy, no noble is going to want to smell of human excrement or of human urine. So what did these tanneries do to solve this issue? Well, actually in Spain, they'd already solved this issue. They had a type of leather that was called peau d'Espagne, and it was a leather that had been scented with herbal and floral essential oils, and so it just smelt a little bit better than normal leather that was used for other things. As well as the leather goods from Spain, the leather goods from Italy were also perfumed at the time. So at the end of the 15th century, the Marquis de Frangipani had developed this way of perfuming leather with almonds. So that's also where we get the name Frangipane for the cakes from, that has almonds in it, from this Marquis de Frangipani. So the leather makers in Grasse decided to adopt this kind of strategy, and they developed something called mise en fleur to perfume their own leather. So they would soak the leather in floral infused water, and then they would cut the leather, make it into gloves, and then they would place the leather gloves in between layers of flowers, and they would change these flowers every 12 hours for a total of 8 days to try and infuse the floral smell into the gloves. Obviously this whole process is long and drawn out, and it meant that the leather cost more, so they needed to sell these leather gloves to the noble classes in order to make this process actually financially viable. And actually it was a tanner called Molinard that really popularised these gloves, because he very ingeniously gave a pair of these gloves to the Queen of France at the time, Catherine de Medici. Catherine was known as a trendsetter. She was married to Henri II, and she was known as someone who really did things a little bit differently, a little bit unexpectedly. So she's someone who wore high heels at her wedding because she was notoriously short. And that started to trend for high heels. Back in the 1500s, that wasn't really a thing to wear high heels ever. So actually, she was also known to be quite ruthless. She's famous for having potentially poisoned someone with a pair of poisoned gloves that she gave them. So you can see what kind of character she was, and whatever she did would spread because, you know, queens just set trends. So her wearing these perfumed leather gloves and people seeing them and talking about them really meant that this trend spread throughout the noble classes, and there was a huge demand for these perfumed gloves. And actually Catherine's gloves were scented with orange blossom, and that led to her being known as La Nerola because of the orange blossom scent. Catherine also instructed her own personal perfumer, René de Florentin, to copy the scent of the gloves, to copy this orange blossom scent so that she could wear it as a perfume about her person at all times. So thanks to Catherine, this trend really spread, and that allowed the perfume and leather making industries in Grasse to bloom together. And actually different manufacturers would perfume their gloves with different fragrances in order to distinguish themselves and to make some kind of USP, some unique selling point to their own products. And really, this industry grew and grew and grew, and by the time of the reign of Henri III, a few years later, people were even said to be wearing these perfume gloves to sleep in. It was an obsession. But actually, this bubble had to burst. By 1759, leather goods were heavily taxed, and that really decreased the amount of sales in the leather industry and the amount of leather industry going on in France. But really, that perfuming was the thing that took over. So the skills for perfuming leather had already developed around Grasse, and so it was just a natural progression as people wanted to smell better and didn't care as much about leather for the perfume and leather industries to separate. However, as late as the 2010s, Guerlain were keeping this perfumed glove trend alive and actually making and selling their own lines of perfumed gloves. So next, what are the actual raw materials that are used to make a leather accord in perfumes? Well, this has changed over the years, and ultimately there was a bit of a shift around the time of sort of the 1980s when leather really became less fashionable, especially in the 90s when leather really wasn't in fashion in perfumery at all. It was all about the freshie, wasn't it, the 90s? But yeah, there was a shift away from aromatics and more into the plants and resin kind of fragrances that could really kind of mimic that leathery smell. The leather accord can really have different facets to it. So it can smell a little bit smoky, it can smell tobacco-y, it can smell even fruity, or it can smell woody. And really it's the different things that are used to make up the leather accord that can really influence that, and also the other fragrances that are with the leather accord in the perfume. So leather really comes in two basic types for most people, I think. There's the soft, black, supple kind of leathers, the sort of the cleaner leathers in a way. And then there's the more green kind of almost dirty animalic kind of leather fragrances as well. So really most famously birch and birch tar have been used to make leather in fragrances, and also the fragrance of the cade. So this is a type of prickly juniper tree or bush, and actually it's the wood and also the roots of the juniper tree that are used to make this kind of leathery smell. Also resins are used, so resins from the tree, the styrax tree, and also resins from the rock rose, so cistus rock rose, so labdanum is used. But even things like oud, saffron and cypriol can give a leathery touch to fragrances. The most common animalic note that has been traditionally used to elicit the smell of leather in fragrances is really castoreum, so that's the scent that comes from beavers. But really that's not used quite so much anymore, and it's really super rare in fragrances. It's more likely to be something synthetic. So most famously there are really two chemical compounds that are used to make that leather smell. So the first one is called IBQ, which stands for isobutylquinoline, and that really is something that makes quite a dark, black, rich, almost tobacco-y kind of leather. It's something that also has a little bit of a green aspect to it. So the fragrance of IBQ is sometimes described as slightly like asparagus even. IBQ is also used in synthetic ouds, so you can kind of see where the oud leather crossover comes from there. Also there's something called suederal, and actually you can kind of guess what that smells like. It smells like a suede or a leather. It's something that's a little bit more gentle than IBQ. So finally, which fragrances do I enjoy with leather notes? I have a few leather fragrances in my collection, and I also have a few samples of some leather fragrances, and I'm just going to take you through the ones that I appreciate from light to dark, and I'm just going to talk about how the leather fits in those fragrances. I think in general I prefer a light leather. I think I like something quite supple and quite black and smooth actually. I also really like suede in fragrances, but I think that really I'm not so keen on that green, very raw leather smell. I think that's something that I need to adjust my nose to before I can really truly enjoy it. But I do see the beauty in it, perhaps just not on me. So the first fragrance I'm going to talk about is really the lightest on the leather scale. I think actually the listed note in this fragrance is suede, and I think I'd agree with that because it is very, very light. I think even if you don't like leather, even if you think you've been put off by leather fragrances, you could still enjoy this fragrance. So this one is Coach EDP, and I think this fragrance was originally designed to reflect their handbags, and I do get that feeling of a handbag from this one, but it's very, very, very subtle, and it's really only in the dry down that you do smell the suede. So this fragrance starts out quite fruity, it's got a raspberry note at the beginning, and it's got a fresh pink rose, and it dries down into quite a creamy, musky fragrance, but with that suede, so a creamy, musky suede. I think this fragrance would actually be quite boring actually without that suede note. It'd just be a generic kind of fruity floral musk, but really that suede note really elevates this fragrance and makes it a little bit more. I wear this fragrance to work quite a lot because it's quite long lasting, and it also is something that I think is very unchallenging. I just can't see anybody disliking this fragrance. I think it's going to be at least a like for this one. So that's Coach EDP. So my second choice is one from Elizabeth Arden, and this is Fifth Avenue Royale. I think this one was really, really popular on YouTube a while ago, and I still really, really enjoy this fragrance. So this one just makes me think of gentlemen's clubs. It makes me think of going out for dinner. It's just got that sort of, you know, boozy evening out kind of feel about it. And I think that's really because it has those boozy notes. It also has raspberry, and it also has frankincense, and also that sort of, to me, it's like a brown leather, this fragrance, a brown, smooth leather. I think that's really because I think of gentlemen's clubs. I think of sofas with this fragrance almost. You know, relaxing on a sofa with a nice drink, having had some nice food is really the feeling I get from this fragrance. This is not a really long-lasting fragrance, but it's a very easy to wear. It's a fun one, and I just really like this fragrance. So this is Elizabeth Arden Fifth Avenue Royale. So my third choice is one of my favourite fragrances from my entire collection. That's Guerlain's La Petite Robe Noire Black Perfecto. I've talked about this one loads, so I'm not going to linger here, but really this one just makes me think of a really nice evening out. I often wear leather boots when I go out, and I just think this fragrance just fits with me and how I am. So this one is a powdery rose, it's cherry, and it's also licorice, but with that gorgeous black smooth leather that I really love. And really, this fragrance just has all of my favourite notes, and also a nice musky dry down as well. So because of that note profile, and just because of how long lasting this fragrance is, and just the level of projection you get from this fragrance, it's just one of those perfect fragrances for me. So that's Guerlain's La Petite Robe Noire Black Perfecto. So this next fragrance is a bit of a transitional one. It sort of changes from very light to quite dark. And this one's called Etui Noir by Miller Harris. So Etui Noir translates as black needle case. Who knows? So this one starts off quite a soft, almost powdery suede to me. And by the end of the fragrance, it transforms into something darker, woodier, and sort of slightly incensey, maybe even a little bit smoky, more of a leather kind of fragrance. So I think the powderiness at the beginning is really the iris. It's a little bit makeup-y almost to start, almost like the inside of a handbag, you know, that kind of suede lining of the handbag. And then as it progresses, it just becomes darker, and also the incense in this fragrance really adds to that dark feel. I really like this one. I really like the change in this, and I think this one is deceptively strong. This is something, the first time I wore it, I wore quite a few sprays because I couldn't really smell it to begin with, because that sort of gentle powderiness and the suediness is really quite subtle. But actually, as this progresses, it seems to get stronger. And yeah, I just didn't really realise. But yeah, this one has been a recent favourite. It's called Etui Noir, and it's by Miller Harris. So this next fragrance is one from Atelier Cologne, and it's one that I've not really heard anybody speak about on YouTube, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but this one is Encens Celeste. So Encens Celeste actually translates as heavenly incense, and you can tell just from the name really that this fragrance is not all going to be about leather. It's definitely going to be more about the incense. So this one opens with a very citrusy feel, and also a very vegetal, almost dry, kind of almost earthy feeling, but also perfumed kind of leather to me. It's a very sort of, yeah, not quite so supple, not quite so friendly, this leather. This fragrance really has that richness that you get with incense-based fragrances, and really as it dries down, the leather does fade back. But really that incense is so fragrant and not smoky really, but yeah, fragrant and resinous, and it just has this gorgeous kind of dry down that I absolutely love the day after on clothes. I think this is actually quite a subtle fragrance, but it's really long lasting, and I think it's quite a nice, friendly beginner kind of incense fragrance. So that's Encens Celeste by Atelier Cologne. So this next fragrance is one from Theodoros Kalotinis, and it's from his Golden Secrets line, which is slightly higher priced to his normal line, but I think this one is worth it. So this one is called Leather Iris. So Leather Iris starts out with a really nice sweet iris note, and it's kind of almost a little bit cocoa-y or hazelnutty to me. It really makes me think of like a very dry Nutella at the beginning of this fragrance. It then sort of turns more into a buttery kind of shoe leather. Something that really makes me think of just really supple black leather shoes that you just bought from a shop. This also has a slightly golden feel to me, so it's got a slight smokiness, and there's also something that smells a little bit like a tobacco or an immortelle in this fragrance. Definitely sort of something a little bit golden and sunshiny. I think this fragrance really, as it dries down, it becomes a little bit dirtier and a little bit less clean than the powdery beginning with that iris and that sort of cocoa-y feel. This one is definitely something that turns a little bit more leathery as it dries, and it also gets a little bit more musky. I really like this fragrance because of that warmth and that sweetness at the beginning, and I also just really like the transition that you get in this fragrance. So that's Leather Iris. So this next fragrance is one from Shay and Blue, and this one is called Blood Oranges. So actually it's blood oranges and leather, this fragrance, with a bit of a woodiness in the dry down. If you've not smelt blood oranges, they're a little bit dulled almost. They're sort of less bright and happy than that sort of OJ smell you get from normal oranges. And I'd say in this fragrance, it smells more like you're smelling the pith or the peel of the orange. It's definitely something that's a little bit more bitter than just an orange juice. Actually, I think that really pairs really well with the suede leather that's in this fragrance. And as it dries, it gets a little bit more woody. I'd say this lasts about 3-4 hours on my skin. It's not really a beast mode fragrance either. It's something that's quite subtle. But yeah, I quite like this one. And actually, out of the Shay and Blue fragrances, even though I'm not a fan of that dull citrus smell, I did really appreciate this one. I think it's just a very different kind of fragrance. That's Shay and Blue, Blood Oranges. So the next fragrance is one from Tom Ford, and I think this is technically marketed towards men, but I'm really not sure why, because the rest of this line, some of them are marketed towards women. I think they should just make them all unisex really. But anyway, this fragrance is called Noir Parfum Extreme or Extreme, I'm not quite sure which one. So this has that core Noir line DNA. If you've not tried anything from the Noir line, that Noir DNA is the coffee, cardamom, ginger, vanilla. That's really the core of this fragrance. And for this one, they've added a leather note. The leather here is quite dark, but I'd say actually as this dries down, the leather sort of fades back a little bit and it's more gentle. This has quite a soapy feel, I think maybe because of the cardamom mixing with the leather, and it's slightly less easy, this one. But I'd say really as this dries down, because the leather does fade back, it's still quite an easy fragrance to wear for me. And it's something that I have worn a few times and thought, I quite like this one. I think maybe I even like this one a little bit more than Noir Parfum, actually, just because it has that leather added. This one I'd say is actually not beastly, and it's actually quite a gentle fragrance. I think, I could definitely pull this one off. So that's Noir Parfum Extreme by Tom Ford. So the next fragrance is one from Van Cleef and Arpels, and this one's called Orchid Leather. So Orchid Leather, I think, is probably my favourite fragrance that I've tried from Van Cleef and Arpels. I think I've tried 5 or 6 now, and this one's definitely in the #1 spot. I think the reason I like this, other than the smell of it, is also because it lasts and it really projects. It feels like it would be a really good value buy from Van Cleef and Arpels because the fragrances are not that cheap, are they? So this one is a really sweet, dark, fruity leather fragrance. But in the dry down, there's also some really sweet, fragrant incense to it as well. And I just find it very seductive, very sensuous. And it makes me think of a really strong black leather with a really heavy grain in it. I think this is definitely on the darker side of the leather fragrances, but it's still not, something scary. This is still quite a friendly leather. So this is Orchid Leather by Van Cleef and Arpels. So I think this next fragrance, I don't think many people would put it in a leather video, but to me, the dry down of the fragrance does have a leathery feel to it. So this is Lattafa's Ameer Al Oud Intense Oud. So this is a nutty, vanilla, sugary fragrance to begin with a sort of hint of pepper. And there's also, as it dries down, it doesn't really change that much, but it becomes a little bit leathery to me. I don't know whether there's some kind of synthetic oud in this fragrance that's maybe smelling a little bit like leather for me, or whether there is some saffron or something in this fragrance maybe making me think that there's leather. Clearly it's going to be a synthetic saffron if it's Lattafa. I mean, this fragrance I think was like, what, £10, brand new. These are not expensive fragrances, but I think this one is really good for £10. I think I've decluttered all of my other Lattafa fragrances because I just didn't get on with them. I didn't love them. This one I do think is a good fragrance for the money. So that's Lattafa's Ameer Al Oud Intense Oud. So that's the final fragrance in this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, then please press the like button, and please also consider subscribing if you haven't done already. And please let me know, what is your favourite leather fragrance? And also, did you know about the history of Grasse and its associations with perfume and leather? I'd be really interested to know. Please let me know down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.